is now resumed. I just asked the clerk to check that it's broadcasting. Before we begin, can I remind members to turn off their mobile phones completely as they interfere with the recording equipment. First item is correspondence. Correspondence item 2018-356, email from Jim Ryan, also forwarded by Deputy Munster, dated 13th November, asking if the Joint Committee would give a serious investigation into the poor behaviour of cyclists in the light of this gentleman's experiences while commuting to work. So, Deputy Munster to discuss.
Just that the committee would maybe we put it down as a topic for discussion on the work programme. Yeah,
for 2019. That's fine. Is that agreed? Sorry, Deputy Troy.
Topic.
Well, the topic is that the concerns of the cyclists wants the Joint Committee to seriously they copy the letter you would have there from him. And let's be pardon.
Just in relation to dangers posed by cyclists, that any suggestions the committee have to improve, that we could put forward to
cyclists.
Yes, yeah.
By all means,
I think the road safety people might be useful to put that letter to them as well when they come in.
There's well established cycling advocacy groups in Dublin to bring forward.
We have it, if we put it on an item on the agenda,
Yeah, and I mean it is important because quite often cyclists actually will come against you on going the wrong way quite often. That is a serious hazard, particularly dark evenings in Dublin.
All of the hazards,
You either see them and are hardly expected, and people really.
That's what I'm trying to ascertain here, Chairman. Are you saying the hazards that cyclists face, or are you talking about discussing
well, I'm sorry
that the cyclists are the hazards? Because it's too very.
You're asking me.
Well, no, it's not. It's too very distinct.
It's very clear to me. It may not be clear to you, but when I see cyclists, some of them, and not a lot, but occasionally I do see them, maybe twice a week, I'd say, cyclists coming the wrong way in traffic, breaking the lights and coming towards you, travelling in the opposite direction, and you don't see them. I don't know if that's your experience, but it's certainly mine. And I think it's
then, Chairman, are we going to bring in every motorist who breaks the law?
Well, that's a good question too.
That's effectively what you're asking us to do here. I thought what you were saying.
I don't know if
suggestion.
you had your lunch, Deputy, but the facts are it was Deputy Munster asked that this be brought down. We actually agreed, and you agreed, that we would put it on a work programme, and that's where this has arisen from. So,
sorry, Chairman, I'm just looking for clarification.
Well,
are we bringing in representative groups for issues facing cyclists and the welfare of cyclists using our road?
For the committee to decide.
Or are we bringing in, as you seem to be indicating now, a person who has a grievance with a cyclist who has broken the rules of the road? And that's what I'm trying to ascertain here.
I don't think that's the case at all. I think the letter was sent in by Deputy Munster and this gentleman, and it was discussed here. Look, I don't mind what you do. If you don't want to come in, you can do that. It doesn't matter. I'm just trying to help people.
Could I suggest that, if we're putting it on the work programme, we should try and have something in one section that's comprehensive.
Yeah,
it's not necessarily just the City Council in relation to Dublin will have plans, for example, in relation to in relation to changes that are likely to happen, and they will have some intelligence on behaviour in relation to the pinch points and things like that. I think we should do it. If we're going to do something, we should do something reasonably comprehensive, and not just have one dimension to it, but that it's multifaceted.
Well, I wouldn't take from the citizen who wrote in expressing his concerns. I think that's a good thing, that they would recognise it as a serious issue for them, and it is a serious issue for us. And I think in this context, I think you're absolutely right. But I think, Deputy Munster, I think you proposed that we put it on the work programme, and that's what we agreed.
I would agree with the other suggestions there too,
Yeah. Okay, so are you happy with that, Deputy Trine, or do you want to object to that? Or?
I wasn't objecting, Chairman. I was merely
asking.
Happy,
as long as you're happy.
No, sorry, Chairman. I was merely asking a point. Who are we bringing in?
Sure.
Are we going to come to a stage where if someone writes in about someone breaking the rules of the road, that we're going to invite them in before an Oireachtas committee, and I wouldn't think that's wise and I wouldn't think that's prudent.
Sure.
But I fully support what Deputy Murphy is talking about, a multifaceted approach, and bringing in the advocacy groups for the people who are trying to promote and encourage increased usage of cycling as a method of transport in our city, and that's what I would like to see happening.
But I think that's a very good idea, and I think, again, the work programme is when we discuss it, Deputy, is when you would, that point I think is very well made here. But I do commend the gentleman for writing in. So if it's okay, we move on to correspondence 2018-357A and B. Email from the Office of Minister Shane Ross, dated 14th November. A letter from Minister Ross to me as chairperson concerning a general scheme of taxi regulation, Rickshaw Bill 2018, and attaching a copy of the general scheme. So this matter is the subject of today's meeting. So we'll be debating that, we'll note that. Correspondence 2018-358A and B. A. Email from Aidan Flynn, General Manager, Freight Transport Association of Ireland, dated 15th of November. B. Attaching a press release, lack of fuelling sites, parks, cleaner HGV and ambitions. And the second correspondence, Brexit withdrawal agreement would keep Ireland trading. So it's proposed to note this correspondence. Is that agreed? Agreed. Correspondence 2018-360, email sent by Paul Kelly Clark to the Joint Committee dated 19 November concerning meeting with Mr Jim Mead, CEO Irish Rail and Connolly Station on Wednesday 21st, and a meeting with Stephen Kent, Bus Éireann and Busaras on Wednesday 21st of November. These meetings took place last week, so I'd be happy to update the committee if they wish.
Well, Chairman, just on that, I think both meetings were very productive. I'm certainly glad that I went to both meetings, but I would have concern in relation to the point that on Sundays, when I checked the website in terms of what the week's committee schedule was, there was no schedule, there was no works on for our committee.
Sure.
And we all make, well, I tend to try and make my arrangements for a week in advance, especially someone who's commuting in and out from a constituency in terms of attending.
Of course, yeah.
And I just think, unless we know a week in advance, and even if there was something else on that couldn't have been, we shouldn't be.
Sure.
We should receive greater warning than 24, 48 hours in advance. But I do accept what you were trying to do, and it was a well worthwhile excursion, but I just ask in future reference that we would have a minimum notice period.
I agree with you. The problem was the Minister actually dropped out and the slot became vacant. Pardon? Yeah, sorry, excuse me. Oh, no, that was today's meeting, is it? Yeah, sorry. No, sorry. The Vice Chairman, who's a member of your party, had organised a trip to Cork on that date, but it didn't actually go ahead. There was some problem with that. So because the date was fixed, and in fact there was nothing, as you rightly point out, other than the visit to Cork for that day, but it was cancelled at the last, and we thought it was a good idea that if we could, notwithstanding the short notice, that we would do what we did, which was to go and visit. And there, I think, as you say, they were very useful meetings. I think certainly I learned a lot from them. I'm sure if any other members would like to go along to visit those people, they would certainly benefit from it.
Could I just ask if I wasn't able to go myself?
Sure.
Could I just ask, I mean, Kildare North and South TDs met with the National Transportation Authority there about a week ago, and one of the issues, as you know yourself, is overcrowding on trains at peak time.
Indeed, yeah.
And we were told at that meeting that the refurbishment of the 29 carriages was not going to proceed because it was the cost of it was prohibitive.
Yeah.
They were talking about hiring in or seeing if it was possible to lease trains from other countries, and that's not as straightforward as it might seem in relation to the width of the gauge in the railway system here. Did they outline anything about how they would deal with the overcrowding?
In fact, all those issues were discussed, but they weren't. What we did, we wanted to see the issues in relation to signalling, the issues in relation to the delay on commuter trains, particularly on the Northern Line. We wanted to see, because Robert Troy had at an earlier meeting raised the issue of bus hours and the state it was in. So that was the origin of the meeting. So yeah, we have a briefing, but I think it would be very helpful, in fact, if we invited in Irish Rail to discuss those issues and to give it priority on our work programme. I think it would be very helpful indeed, because it is a very important, critical point actually, that as the demand on Irish Rail increases, that the strategy they are dealing with, particularly in view of the context of the National Transport Plan, that we know exactly what's going on.
But yeah, to answer your question, Deputy Murphy, there'll be no new carriages for a minimum of 24 months.
Right,
I think that's fair to say, Chairman.
Yeah.
Well, I think. Look, it's what happened at the meeting happened at the meeting. I think if we get them here on the record, that'll be the way to do it. Certainly, I don't think that what you said is untrue, but it would be of grave concern to me as well as it would to you. So, where's the next one there? Sorry. So you're happy with that we'll invite in Irish Rail? Correspondence 2018.
Can I just say, if we're going to be doing that again on a work programme,
sure, of course,
it's quite useful to, I mean, for example, there's a number of announcements at the moment in relation to changes in relation to sustainable transport, and I mean, obviously there was an issue in relation to bus connects, for example, assuming that there was capacity on the rail network that really isn't there at peak time, that if we're going to be talking to or inviting in some of the public transport providers, that we have a theme in relation to
in
relation to it, and if there are others,
I'd be very happy if you give us a proposal on that. I did, just for clarity, the meeting happened because I was trying to support the views of members of the committee as they expressed it to me. One, to visit Cork, when that was cancelled. Secondly, to find something that would be productive and that a particular member had raised. And I'm delighted you've raised that now, and I would be very happy that it would be put on the work programme. I'd be very happy any correspondence or proposals any member has, that's what we're here to consider. And I don't think, since I've been sitting here, we've ever not done anything that anybody suggested. So if you would put forward your suggestions, we'll make sure that the committee will have full notice and proper notice of them. Correspondence 2018-361, email from Gillian Harper, Embassy of France, dated 19 November, concerning invitation to meet some a breakfast meeting in the Gibson Hotel, a number of French locally elected officials, MPs, etc., from the French Ministry of Transport. This email was circulated last week and is supposed to note the correspondence. Is that agreed? Agreed?
Chairman,
well, I wasn't able to make it myself, so I do know that some members were going, but I don't see them here today. Correspondence 2018-362, email from Catherine Murphy, TD, dated 22nd November, requesting that the Joint Committee invite the Football Association of Ireland and Mr John Delaney to appear before the Joint Committee, provide the Committee an update on its governance and strategies and the challenges it faces domestically and internationally. Mr Frank Gavin and Mr Eamon Naughton may also be invited to give some background on the challenges facing the National League here. So, Deputy Murphy.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is an issue that we're going to be all familiar with. There's been a lot. We had the three chief executives in from the GAA, the IRFU and the FAI. I think it was the beginning of last year. And essentially it was around the issues of governance. You know, we're not in the business of sitting here talking about who should be the football manager, and that's not what the proposal is. But there are issues. There are issues about the development of sport, and it obviously is one of the aspects of our remit. And there's a I think it's fair to say that there's an underperformance, if you like, and it may well be that we have we have we could do with actually teasing that out, and I think that it should go on our work programme, and we should invite these two, obviously the League of Ireland and the FAI CEO, and if there are others that we would benefit from hearing from, it would be helpful as well.
I think if the committee would agree, we should certainly do that, and if any member has any other parties or persons they think we ought to invite, if let the clerk know, and then we circulate them. Fine. Okay, so we now move on to the pre-legislative scrutiny of the general scheme of the airport. Sorry, is that the right one? Yeah. Noise regulation bill. No, give me the wrong stuff. Sorry about that. Apologies about that, Paul. Okay, yeah, sold me a blinder there. The purpose of today's meeting, sorry, forgot to take that text out. Pre-legislative scrutiny of the general scheme of taxi regulation amendment, Rickshaw Bill 2018. In this regard, I would like to welcome the following officials: Ms Maeve McLaughlin, Ms Nicola Dwyer and Ms Patricia Walker from the Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport. Are those names right? They are. Sorry, no, it's wrong. I apologise. I used the wrong name. Waller, sorry. Yeah. I'm afraid somebody got out this text. I apologise. It certainly, I can assure you, was not intended. Before we commence, in accordance with procedure, I am required to read the following. By virtue of Section 1721 of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of the evidence you are to give to the committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise nor make charges against any person or persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or it identifiable. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against either a person outside the Houses or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. So I now invite Ms Maeve McLaughlin from the Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport to make the opening statement, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, I wish to convey the sincere apologies of Minister Ross, who unfortunately is tied up with an engagement and is unable to attend here today. I am here to assist in the consideration by the Committee of the General Scheme of a Taxi Regulation Amendment Rickshaw Bill, as recently submitted to and approved by Government for publication, and for the drafting of a bill by Parliamentary Council in the Office of the AG. The Minister is very pleased with the support this general scheme has received so far and believes that it will have positive impacts both for the rickshaw sector and general public alike. As you know, a key role for the Minister is to develop robust legislation to underpin vehicles used for the carriage of passengers for reward. As the committee is probably aware, under the Taxi Regulation Act 2013, which was passed into law just recently in 2013, the NTA is the independent regulator of the taxi, hackney and limousine sector. Technically, these are known under the legislation as Small Public Service Vehicles, or SPSVs. The 2013 Act set out new rules and arrangements about licences for taxis. As we all know, taxis and taxi drivers must be fully licensed. The NTA, as regulator, sets the standards and requirements for the sector, which include rules about vehicle standards, suitability, drivers and insurance requirements. It could be said that Ireland's regulation of taxis exemplifies best practice in relation to public safety and consumer protection. We are all aware that a wide range of public concerns have been raised in relation to rickshaws. The committee has already discussed the dangers posed by rickshaws on our streets, and concerns have been expressed over public safety issues that have been reported, particularly in relation to reckless driving, as well as reports of other unlawful behaviour. While there have been connections made between rickshaws and drug dealing, it would be unfair to say that this type of behaviour applies to all who currently work within the sector. However, it is a concern and is simply not acceptable to continue. As the committee will remember, last year the NTA was tasked with conducting a public consultation on rickshaws. The NTA's subsequent report showed how 95% wanted rickshaw operators to have appropriate liability insurance. 86% wanted rickshaw operator drivers to be Garda vetted, and 95% wanted the rickshaw vehicle to be required to complete a roadworthiness inspection. With this in mind, it is now intended to give powers to the NTA to introduce a licensing regime for non-motorised rickshaws only. The framework for this licensing regime will largely mirror that which is already in place for taxis. First and foremost, this will ensure that all drivers are vetted and vehicles are vetted and registered. The NTA will also be able to set mandatory insurance requirements. The Minister considers that this option will greatly reduce risk and significantly improve both passenger and public safety and enhance customer experience. Before I continue, I should also explain that the Department met with a number of stakeholders to discuss the shape and the practicalities of the future regulatory approach for rickshaws, including representatives from a number of the relevant local authorities and the NTA, and broad agreement was indicated with the regulatory direction proposed. The Minister is appreciative of the input and assistance provided by stakeholders on this matter. A few months ago, it was discussed with the committee how rickshaws can either be motorised, pedal-powered or pedal-assisted. This proposed bill will provide for the licensing of certain non-motorised vehicles carrying passengers for award. In the case of rickshaws, this means that only the pedal-powered and the pedal-assisted rickshaws operating for the carriage of passengers will be licensed. Non-motorised rickshaws are only capable of achieving speeds of up to 25 km per hour. As it is recognised that vehicles travelling at lower speeds can lead to lower risks, the bill will allow only the slower pedal-type rickshaws to be licensed. It is anticipated that this should help to reduce risk. It is proposed that the faster motorised rickshaws will not be licensed or permitted to be used for the carriage of passengers for award in Ireland. By licensing the slower rickshaws only, it will promote greater safety. Furthermore, it is expected that the licensing of these greener rickshaws will help to improve the ambience in our city centres, bringing further benefits for tourism and local businesses, as I know this was an issue that was raised by many of the committee members at the last occasion when the Minister discussed rickshaws. The committee has previously been informed about specific enforcement issues involving rickshaws. With a motor attached, the rickshaw is a mechanically propelled vehicle and subject to certain road traffic laws like any car. Detaching the motor transforms it into a pedal-powered vehicle, which is regarded as a bicycle and treated very differently under road traffic law. This is challenging when it comes to enforcement, since it is so hard to be certain about the type of vehicle involved in advance of taking any enforcement action. To address this, the heads in the general scheme make provision for the detention of any rickshaw where an enforcement officer is of the opinion that it could be a motorised rickshaw carrying passengers for award. After detention, the authorities would be able to establish the vehicle type and to prosecute if appropriate, or to return the vehicle to the owner if no offence has been committed. I think the committee will agree that these measures will facilitate decisive enforcement, and we know, of course, that effective enforcement is central to the success of any licensing regime. In order to provide for improved public safety and passenger experience, the draft heads include a number of licensing and enforcement provisions addressing broad themes, including vehicle checking and registration, driver vetting and registration, requirements regarding insurance and fare regulation. As mentioned earlier, these provisions are to a large extent reflective of existing provisions for the regulation of taxis under the Taxi Regulation Act, an act which only 5 years ago was passed by the Houses of the Oireachtas and signed into law by the President. As such, the 2013 Taxi Regulation Act constitutes a modern piece of legislation. It is regarded as a very helpful foundation as we move to introduce regulation for rickshaws, a sector also responsible for the carriage of passengers for award. The intention is that the NTA will be able to move quickly to introduce the new licensing regime and address the concerns that have been expressed. For the rickshaw drivers, this will all mean that they will need to apply for a licence to work as a driver in the sector. Like in the case of taxi driver licences, the rickshaw driver licensing application will also involve applying for Garda vetting. Of course, the rickshaw vehicle itself will need to be licensed and will have to comply with any vehicle regulations set down by the regulator. The end result should be a regulatory regime for rickshaws that is as successful and robust as that applying for the taxi sector at present. As committee members will know, the Railway Safety Amendment Bill, which was discussed earlier this year, seeks to provide that railway safety critical workers will be subject to the same rules regarding alcohol limits and other intoxicants as specified persons under road traffic legislation. This specified person category in road traffic legislation includes professional drivers on the road, like drivers of taxis, buses or road haulage vehicles. This general scheme intends to ensure that licensed rickshaw drivers will also be recognised under statute as specified persons, and that they will also be subject to the same strict provisions as regards alcohol limits and other intoxicants as other professional drivers on the road. I am sure that the committee will agree that including these provisions is important, since a stricter approach in respect of drugs and alcohol for rickshaw drivers will of course help to ensure increased safety both for passengers and for other road users. I should point out that the draft heads will also amend provisions under the 2013 Taxi Regulation Act, which relate to fixed payment notices. These are fines imposed by NTA enforcement officers on taxi drivers who commit certain offences. Under the new provisions, rickshaw drivers will also be subject to such fines. Furthermore, the amendments in the general scheme will modernise certain provisions for fixed payment notices to mirror the same provisions set out under road traffic legislation for fixed charged notices as imposed by An Garda Síochána. As I've said, the intention of this draft general scheme is to improve public safety and to enhance passenger experience for rickshaw drivers and rickshaw passengers. The Minister welcomes the broad support he has received to date, and it is hoped that this bill will progress through the Houses without delay. I thank the Chairman for allowing me to make this presentation and look forward to hearing the views of the committee.
Thank you very much for your opening comments. I now go to members, and if I stick to the normal process, I'll start with Deputy Troy, then go to Sinn Féin, and then to the Independent Group. So Deputy Troy. Sorry, the Social Democrats. Apologies. Apologies. Well, no offence intended. Go ahead, Deputy.
Thank you, Chairman, and welcome the opportunity to discuss this pre-legislative scrutiny, and I welcome the fact that at long last we have a bill coming forward, and that's no critical remark at the officials, because I do know that for a long time Minister Ross himself was of the mind to ban an outright ban of rickshaws. So I welcome that he has rowed back on his opinion, and now that he's looking at regulating rickshaws, because personally I do believe that they do offer an alternative mode of transport, very much so in a large urban area where we're already suffering from huge congestion problems. And you know, if you come out from the Tree Arena or any large sporting event, rickshaws are a very, very welcome mode of transport to get people out of congestion and back into the city centre or wherever. So from that perspective, I welcome the change of heart. Again, I suppose both Deputy Munster and I had an amendment to a road traffic bill, I think going back to December 2015, that would have largely given effect to what has been given effect today, and that is making the NTA, giving the NTA the powers to bring forward regulations. So while it's welcome, we've wasted almost 2 years in terms of the lack of regulation. Again, that's not the officials' fault. That's down to the political masters of the day. Can I ask, just I suppose, in relation to the taxi regulations, is there any scope within this current amendment to the Taxi Regulation Act to 2013 to amend any of the regulations that are currently in place for taxis? And I'm thinking in terms of the transfer of taxi licence is very, very restrictive now. There's also an issue in terms of, I suppose, dare I say it, in certain instances, a lack of taxis and a shortage of taxis in certain large urban areas. And is there an opportunity to address that during the amendment to the bill? I welcome the fact that that all drivers are going to be vetted. I think that's extremely important when you have somebody offering a service in terms of public service and carrying of passengers. I think people need to have confidence that they're getting into a vehicle where the driver is vetted and they can feel safe and secure. So that's welcome. The fact that the vehicles are going to be of roadworthiness, that's welcome. I suppose, can you outline in terms of the regulations who is going to be the competent person or the competent body that's going to sign off the roadworthiness of the vehicle? Like currently, you have the DEO test for small, for heavy goods and small buses. In terms of a vehicle, you have to go to your NCT. So, who's going to sign off the roadworthiness for these rickshaws? In terms of insurance requirements, again, that's welcome because from the point of view of an injury involved in a collision, you do need to have insurance in place. Can I ask, has there been any engagement with the insurance industry themselves in terms of, are we confident that when these regulations are brought in, that the insurance industry will offer a policy to owners of the rickshaws? Because we can see, and I raised it only in the last couple of weeks, the exorbitant cost that insurance companies are placing on our conventional taxi drivers at the moment. Give an example there in my own constituency, Longford Westmeath, where an insurance policy increased fourfold in 12 months, and it ensured, or it forced the operator to reduce the number of cars in the fleet that he had. So, in terms of what level of engagement has the department had with the insurance industry in relation to the provision of insurance? The rickshaw types, so everything, you might clarify, is going to be regulated with the exception of motorised. So does that mean that battery assisted rickshaws will be permitted for use as a public vehicle for carrying passengers? You might clarify that. In relation to the cost, the initial set-up cost of 500,000, is there a fee going to be charged to the rickshaw driver in terms of what it's going to cost to register? Will that fee go towards the initial set-up costs? Who are we going to leave to police the regulation of rickshaws? Is there going to be enforcement officers hired, or are we going to leave it to already overstretched members of An Garda Síochána? And obviously it's a public vehicle, so obviously the rules of the road in relation to alcohol and drugs should apply, and that's welcome. You alluded to the Railway Safety Amendment Bill, which was discussed earlier this year at this committee. Perhaps you might give us an update in terms of where that Railway Safety Amendment Bill is at also. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, now I'm in your hands. Will I take questions from Deputy Munster? Yeah, and then we take from Deputy Murphy and Deputy
Ellis. And I'll share
Ellis.
my time at
That's
Deputy
fine.
Ellis, yeah.
And then if we come back to all the questions together, if that's okay. and then you
Yeah, I'll remember them all.
or if there's too many there,
No,
if you wish,
work
we
away,
can,
yeah.
go ahead, Deputy Munster.
So I want to firstly thank the officials for attending, and I have to say it's a bit disappointing that the Minister's not here himself today, but firstly I want to welcome the new regulations in relation to the non-motorised rickshaws. They're pretty much exactly what I had put in the amendment, and also what Deputy Troy had called for too, so they're to be welcomed. But the opening statement doesn't make it clear in any shape or form why motorised rickshaws are to be banned, and that these regulations will apply only to non-motorised. It says in the statement slower vehicles are safer, but going by that logic, I mean, what does that say about cars, motorbikes, taxis, everything else? If that's is that the sum total of the logic applied to that decision? He also said in relation, there was mention of enforcement issues in the statement, and he had said, with a motor attached, the rickshaw is a mechanically propelled vehicle and subject to certain road traffic laws, like any car. So, are you saying there that motorised rickshaws are subject to the same regulations as taxis? And if that's the case, then what's the problem? But the original reason that I had brought that in was the problem, as far as my understanding, was that the vehicles were uninsured, unlicensed and unregulated. So if you could just clarify those for me. The other thing was, what I was given here this afternoon, it's in the interest of public safety, is not proposed to license motorised rickshaws to carry persons for reward, right? However, in line with Ireland's EU obligations, motorised rickshaws with EU type approval will still be able to be driven in Ireland for personal use. So how is it public safety that you're allowed drive rickshaws for personal use, but not for reward? If you can explain that, because the whole idea of rickshaw is, passenger to carry passengers. But in the case of rickshaws for personal use, how do you propose to monitor that and determine how that is? The other matter you raised was in relation to the motor attached, and that the rickshaw is a mechanically propelled vehicle. But you then said the Minister then said this is challenging when it comes to enforcement, since it is so hard to be certain about the type of vehicle involved in advance of taking any enforcement action. But you can see if a rickshaw is motorised, you can see if somebody's not pedalling like hell to get from one place to the other. You can see that the speed is higher. So if you could just explain that, what's the rationale behind that? But it just doesn't make clear in any shape or form why he's actually banning motorised rickshaws. The reasons given just don't add up. And just in relation to you had mentioned the importance of the consultation process in drafting the legislation. I remember a while back, I think it was the initial consultation, that rickshaw drivers hadn't engaged in it. So there was a further consultation or separate process was conducted on drivers. But I'm just wondering, can we get the details of that process? Was it more rickshaw owners or drivers that were involved in the consultation? Because I suppose at the end of the day it's rickshaw drivers that are set to lose out the most on this. But I would like clarity on the rationale with the Minister's reluctance or decision to ban motorised rickshaws and regulate for the non-motorised. Thanks.
Okay, so sort of a small quandary here. I'll take Deputy Murphy. Thank you. Yeah.
Just have a few questions. Obviously, with any policy, it's not just legislation, but regulation and then enforcement. Just in relation to the regulatory impact analysis that you've provided us with, where did the analysis come from in relation to the costs? I mean, are you looking at what urban centres are you looking at, and what would that actually look like in terms of the enforcement? And would you be working, or would that be working with existing agencies? In relation to that same analysis, I would have thought that the issue of insurance would have been considered in the context of that regulatory impact analysis, and was that something that was considered in any kind of detail with the insurance industry or the Insurance Federation? Is it the vehicle only? Is the vehicle and the driver that will be licensed? Because I'm not entirely clear if that's if it actually covers both. And just some of the other questions in relation to, I'm also confused about the motorised rickshaws and what place they have and how they're to be regulated. Are they banned? How do you deal with that if they present themselves? Because this industry has kind of grown up without any kind of legislation or regulation, and instead of banning it, what's happening is it's going to be legislated for and regulated for. So is it tenable then to ban something that may be already here and in use? And what obstacles does that pose? And just finally, the use of where exactly might they be used? Is it on the public road? Is there pedestrianised streets tend to be where there's a degree of parking of these vehicles? Is that particular aspect, or has that particular aspect been considered?
Right. Thank you, Deputy Ellis, and then we'll go back to the answers.
I thank the officials for coming in, and this has been an ongoing problem for years, and I've been tackling this for years, for many years now. And I was curious, obviously the Minister said he was going to try and ban them outright originally, and now he's saying that motorised vehicles or motorised rickshaws can be used for personal use. That's basically what he's telling us now, and then he's going to regulate non-motorised rickshaws. I suppose there are a number of questions that does raise. For starters, in terms of the insurance and the tax issues, in terms of a motorised rickshaw for personal use, I'd imagine obviously insurance tax kicks in. Where does that leave us with non-motorised? Because you don't have, for a bicycle, you don't have tax, or you don't have insurance, or you don't have a licence plate, which one would expect. Some way you can identify these, or some way you can check them. Is there some intention to have an ID on them, like a licence plate or something like that? And then the issue of the tests and NCT type tests, where are we with those? And you know, how is that going to be done? I'm very curious about that. And also in regards to a licence. A licence, an ordinary driving licence, I suppose, covers motorised. It doesn't cover non-motorised in terms of like what the Minister proposing to bring in legislation for. Are we proposing that we need a licence for that as well? I'm just curious how that will work. I'm also curious about how do you judge? Is there rules and regulations in terms of overcrowding? Some of these rickshaws, we've had 2, 3, 4 people in these. Many of them are only built for 2, and that's it. But you often find there's 3 or 4 gangs of people jump into them. And how are we going to address that? We're going to specifically address that in a certain way by clearly indicating that each vehicle is only 2-seater, 3-seater, etc. I think that definition needs to be very clear for us. The type of licence obviously is a big issue, as I said. How do you know, sometimes it's going to be a difficult line to figure out whether a vehicle is motorised, it has clearly an engine or some sort of a mechanically driven thing apart from pedal power. Are we going to have a specific definition to take that into account? Because I could imagine someone might say, well, my vehicle, I take that off and I just use pedal power. You know, you'll have this argument that they can remove the mechanical end, the electrical end or whatever, and they have a pedal power. Is there going to be a grey area here that there's going to be a bit of argument about? And then, of course, the whole thing in regards to the monitoring of all this. We're struggling to monitor with any other industry. What form of inspectors are we going to have, or are we going to have inspectors? Because it's obviously, it looks to me as though the guards are going to end up being the ones that's going to be looking after this. I can't see us putting in people just specifically for that. And then they're going to have clearly guidelines in terms of how this is tackled. So I'm curious, will there be some sort of a memo given to the guards and to follow certain rules, and that they be clearly outlined? I think it's long overdue that we look at this. I think we should also, because of the taxi industry and the way we sort of introduce licences, we should have a ceiling on the amounts. We shouldn't just rubber stamp people, you know, getting, whether it's a motorised or a non-motorised rickshaw. Certainly when it comes to a motorised rickshaw, we should be able to say that you can, you know, if it's been used, for instance, a non-motorised one is being used for you know, they're charging people and they're using it as a commercial thing. We certainly should have we should have rules and regulations in regards to that. If you're using a rickshaw, a motorised one for personal use, I'm a bit worried about this whole thing, because we have these scooters coming in now that are motorised. Next thing we're going to be tackling is scooters that are motorised. That's the next thing on the agenda, because there's going to be a lot of implications when this comes in regards to those as well. So I think we need to watch that space as well. Thank you.
Right, just before I ask you to respond, I just want to say some excellent questions there, probing. I think they need, obviously you've thought well about it. I just want to say I welcome the Minister's change of mind. In fact, that I welcome the fact that he is not going to ban them all, which was his intention, and I welcome the fact that he's going to have strict and fair regulation of them. And I think it's hugely important that they are properly regulated. During the initial discussion we had some months ago, the comment was made particularly about substance abuse being sold from or by people, and I think the point that was made by me and by other people was that the drug problem obviously is a very serious problem. It's a matter for Garda enforcement, and I think that I don't see why, if obviously if people are breaking the law, that they are, for whatever reason, whatever they're driving or wherever they are, that they're apprehended, and that it is unfair, as you say in your assessment there, that all rickshaw drivers can be put in that category, because they clearly cannot, and I welcome that. I also welcome the fact that for people who may be unemployed or people who may be students or whatever, that it is a form of income for them, which is very useful and can make a difference to them meeting cost of living and so on. So if I can, I'd be happy that you would answer the questions. I know you will, but there's an awful lot of them. So if you want to put them into any particular order, maybe from the members who asked, or whatever you think is reasonable, and members can come in and out as they wish, so that we'll get through the business.
Some of the themes are quite common, so
yeah,
I will
sure,
try.
I'll
try and address the issue about the actual vehicle, because I think that is, it seems to be causing some confusion and caused us quite a lot of confusion for some time. So that might be to open from there, and I'll do my best. Sure, you can remind me if I forget something important. In terms of the actual vehicle, we have engaged extensively with the NTA and An Garda Síochána, and it seems that on the ground, both the NTA and An Garda Síochána have always been clear with us that the rickshaws that are seen to be motorised rickshaws, or the ones that are pedal assist, look the same. So the motor, so to go back to the type of rickshaws, you can either have a pedal powered rickshaw, which is simply like a bicycle, a plain bicycle, you pedal it, it moves. You can have a pedal assist rickshaw, which has a little motor attached, and you pedal, and then the dynamo starts to work and the rickshaw moves faster. And these are both regarded under road traffic law as bicycles, essentially, and they're treated as bicycles, and as has been pointed out by committee members, they don't require motor tax, they don't require motor insurance, and you can't get a driver's licence for them the way you can't get a cyclist licence to be cycling a bike. And then the other type of rickshaw has a motor which is bigger, and the essence on the legal advices that we have been given, the main point about the vehicle is if you can essentially hit a button or turn a throttle and the vehicle moves without doing any pedalling, essentially without any human effort, then it is a mechanically propelled vehicle. So if you have a rickshaw which in any way can be used without pedalling, then it is a mechanically propelled vehicle, and then it falls into the definitions under road traffic for the same as a car. And in those cases, those rickshaws would require the same stuff: motor tax, a driver's licence, and motor insurance. So that is the main differentiation. The difficulty in enforcement is that in order to enforce under the... so if you were... Sorry, I know Deputy Munster mentioned that we are allowing them for personal use. The Irish state is not allowed to prohibit people from using a vehicle if there is type approval for that vehicle in the EU. And there is type approval for some rickshaws in the EU. However, it is our general experience, essentially, that rickshaws are used in city centres, and in fact in Ireland at the moment in 2 city centres, essentially in Dublin and Cork, which is, if you looked at the NTA survey, shows that a very high percentage of the 83% of the respondents said they were from Dublin and only 5% from Cork. So essentially you are looking in this case at an issue that is city centre based. Oh yeah, so it isn't our experience that people buy a rickshaw for use for personal use. It is our experience on the ground that the rickshaws are there. They are somewhat cumbersome to be using for personal use. They take a lot of energy. So it is essentially our understanding that rickshaws will be used for carrying passengers. That's why people buy them and use them. In terms of going back to the laws that are there, under the existing laws, a motorised vehicle that is being used to carry passengers for hire or reward is governed under the existing Taxi Regulation Act. So there are at the moment the NTA could make regulations to govern them, but the regulations that the NTA has made in relation to small public service vehicles, which are motorised, requires all of those small public service vehicles to have 4 wheels. So essentially it means that the motorised ones are prohibited. However, as I have said in relation to our conversations with the NTA and the Garda Síochána, the people on the ground who are trying to enforce these laws cannot enforce them, because if they look at a rickshaw, they can't say, is it a motorised vehicle, is it not a motorised vehicle? And invariably what they have said, anecdotally, they've told us that if they say to somebody, it is a motorised vehicle, the person can literally hop around the corner and take off the motor or adjust the motor in some way, and then it becomes a non-motorised vehicle, and they wouldn't be able to bring a prosecution which would be successful. So while there is effectively a ban for motorised rickshaws already in law, because you're not allowed to have a small public service vehicle which is mechanically propelled but which doesn't have 4 wheels if you're trying to carry passengers, it has been impossible really to enforce that law. So what this new heads does is it brings in detention powers, which allows anybody, in a sense, on a whim, as soon as they see something which looks like a rickshaw, which looks like it might be motorised, and which is carrying passengers or applying to carry passengers, then they can detain that vehicle, and then they can establish whether it is a vehicle governed under the Taxi Regulation Acts or whether it's a vehicle to be governed under this new bill once it's adopted. So it means that there will be detention powers, and you can effectively enforce what you want to happen, what the NTA wants to happen for public service vehicles.
Does anyone want to clarification? Sorry, Deputy. Yeah,
just in relation to even going back to the motorised rickshaw for personal use, my question was to how do you determine whether or not, I mean, if somebody has a rickshaw, I mean, I don't know of anyone that would buy a rickshaw that for personal use, you know, and they might have a car. But how do you determine, or how do you monitor, or how do you enforce? I mean, if you're going to stop somebody, that the first thing they'll say is it's for personal use. So how do you determine if there's somebody beside them or someone in the back of it? I mean, it leaves it wide open, does it not?
if it has 3 wheels and has a motor.
No, but if it's... If,
no,
I mean,
so
if
that's the question.
yeah.
It's the same as yours in a different way. If it has 3 wheels with a motor, it's not a motorised rickshaw in the definition that you gave us, because it has to have 4 wheels. Is that
no, the regulations, under the regulations, if you're motorised, if it's a motorised vehicle, under the regulations, and if you're trying to carry passengers, then you must have 4 wheels under the current regulations.
Yeah. So if it has a motor and it's 3 wheels, it's not a motorised vehicle. Is that it? Is it? I don't know. That's confusing.
But if you're a tourist, you just landed into Grafton Street, and you don't know the customs, and this bill becomes law.
Yeah.
I mean, how are you to know? I mean, how are you to know what rules apply to what vehicles if you can't tell the difference about whether or not a rickshaw is a bicycle or a motorised, a small motorised vehicle?
Well, the intention is that if this bill is, passes through the houses of the Oireachtas and is commenced, that the NTA will make regulations which will require each vehicle to be licensed and each driver to be licensed. And we expect, because the law will allow it, that there will be provisions around signage or some form of registration, so some little registration plate or something to indicate that this is a vehicle which has passed through the procedures in terms of checking the vehicle and making sure it's the right type of vehicle. So they will be quite clearly marked. I suppose like any tourist, when you come to a city, Port or there's information that you get about the public transport system, and there will be it is intended that there will be quite clear indication that this is a rickshaw that has been registered and is licensed and valid. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that is the intention. But that will happen at a later stage when the NTA develops SIs and regulations to rule the sector. At this point, we're just giving the powers and the functions to the NTA to do that.
No, I think the confusion there about the motorised rickshaws for personal use, obviously I can't see how anyone would use a rickshaw for personal use, but you never know. But that's why I said about scooters, motorised scooters, and people are starting to use them, and I know they're used in European countries, and they have 4 wheels. They might be small wheels, but they have 4 wheels. So I'm just wondering, is that going to leave us open, or are we taking into account when we're drawing up this legislation that this could be an issue as well? Because I think we're going to see more of this Christmas, where we're going to see a lot more motorised scooters flying around the area, and that's the next big complaint coming down the road. I have a feeling. So it'll be just an interesting.
Sorry, just in terms of motorised scooters, my understanding is that's the simple kind of L-shaped vehicle with the motor. Is that the one we're talking about?
They're like an ordinary scooter. They have 4 wheels. They have a motor on it.
Are they carrying passengers?
Oh, you could carry a passenger, but but I'm saying it's for personal use. I'm agreeing with you.
Small passenger.
Yeah. No, Rock was on one, so he's not a small passenger.
Noel Rock is electric cars.
the driver.
So, in terms of as far as I understood, the Minister recently indicated his intention to look at the question of motorised scooters, because I know there is much more of them on the streets in terms of people dealing with congestion by using motorised scooters. I'm not sure if you could fit another person on the ones I had in mind, but either way, the intention is to look at road traffic law and to move into some form of recognising that. In terms of beyond that, there is already, if somebody with a motorised scooter which had a platform large enough to take passengers and passengers willing to go, then they would already be governed under the existing Taxi Regulation Act, which covers the motorised vehicles carrying passengers, and they would be prohibited from carrying passengers because they don't have, how many doors you're supposed to have? I think you're meant to have 4 doors and 4 wheels.
Safety belts.
And they don't have safety belts. So they wouldn't in any way meet the regulations.
If further clarity on all of that, if you can get it.
On
Just
what
on the whole
exactly?
point there that Deputy Ellis raises.
The motorised scooters.
Well, that's his question, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think it's answered in the sense that the Minister is looking at the overall picture in terms of all these issues.
The hybrid vehicles you're talking about.
In terms of the motorised scooters, I think only in the last week or so the Minister indicated his intention to look at definitions and to look at that concept under road traffic law, because up till now they weren't really an issue, but in recent times there are way more of them. So it is going to be looked at.
Can I just start from my own head exactly the thing again? I never got it right. It might be a bit slow today. If I'm carrying passengers on any three-wheeled vehicle, right?
Yes.
It doesn't matter whether it has a motor or not, because in terms of the future, because the future applies only if it is a four-wheeled motorised vehicle. Is that a fair point? I'm just trying to understand it. So if I'm wrong, I have no problem saying I'm wrong.
Yeah. So sorry, if any motorised vehicle that is carrying passengers,
has to have 4 wheels to be licensed.
Yes, if it's motorised vehicle. So if you stopped a rickshaw and it had a heavy motor on it, and if you could turn a throttle and the rickshaw could start, then it's a motorised vehicle, and it is.
But with a motor with which one with 3 wheels and a motor? What is that?
So if there was a 3-wheeled motorised rickshaw which had the capacity to just turn a throttle or switch a button and the rickshaw would start, then that would be a motorised mechanically propelled vehicle, and under the current law for taxis, because it doesn't have 3 wheels, it is prohibited.
Because it doesn't have 4 wheels.
In that it doesn't meet the specifications, and it's not licensed.
Okay, well, look, I'll study the regulations afterwards so you can understand it fully. Anybody else got any other questions?
I'm happy to.
I know you are. I welcome you.
I'm doing. We're happy to come through with further clarifications, but it is.
Deputy Rock is a member of the committee to show how it works. And the Minister, of course.
The Minister did say in May that it is a complicated issue.
No problem. Deputy Troy.
I just wonder, can we get some answers to the other questions we raised? Yeah.
Sure, of course. Okay. Again, somebody asked, I'm sorry, I can't remember who, I think it was Deputy Ellis, will you need a driver's licence to drive a rickshaw? So, in terms of the non-motorised rickshaws, you will not need a cycling or driving licence for it. However, in order to carry passengers, you will need a rickshaw driver licence in order to be a valid person and have the Garda vetting to operate as a rickshaw driver. They're not motorised, so you wouldn't have to do a kind of a driving test in the way you would for a car driving licence. But the licence that, like a taxi has, or if you're a taxi driver, you do a car driver test, and then you can drive a car and you get a car driver licence, and then subsequently you do a taxi driver test, or you do the application to become a taxi driver, you become a taxi driver, you get a taxi driver licence. Because this is a bicycle, essentially, and not motorised, the first stage isn't applying. You don't have to do a how to drive or how to cycle a rickshaw test, but you do have to, because you're going to be carrying passengers, you do have to do an application which will involve Garda vetting in order to become a driver of a rickshaw carrying passengers.
Question on that, just in terms of, the way in a taxi you have a meter and you record what the passengers' distances and things like that, and you have the different charging rates and things like that. How do you operate that in, say, with a rickshaw that's carrying passengers and non-motorised? Is there a mechanism, or is it just there's going to be some sort of a standard charge. I'm not sure how that works, because you hear of people getting into these rickshaws and one person charges you tenner, another charges you 20, another charges you 30. So we have to have some way of monitoring revenue. That's the issue.
The general scheme will will set up the NTA as an independent regulator, and one of their functions will be to regulate fares. They may decide how to regulate them. They may decide to go, although I think it is unlikely, they will have powers to go a very serious, if I can say that, way of regulating and setting fares, or they may decide to go more like the route of the hackneys, where an oral fare is agreed in advance and then a trip is made. So they will have, the powers are permissive. They may regulate the fares, or they may be very hands-off in how they regulate them. But there are powers in the general scheme to allow them to regulate fares.
We'll have a note before the legislation comes through on that issue for clarity for Deputy Ellis when they've made a decision.
The problem with that, it's unfair in terms of competition, if you know what I mean. Then what you're doing is you're allowing someone to barter over how much, if that's what we end up with. I just think that would be very unfair to people who are getting a livelihood.
Some person thought the fare was 10 and when they got there it was 20. And that's the other side of it as well. So it's the clarities you're looking for, and I think what the witness is saying is that we'll have that by the time.
Just to clarify, in relation to the taxi sector at the moment, my understanding is that the fares for taxis are regulated and quite clear. The maximum fares are quite clear. In the case of hackneys, which also operated under regulation from the NTA, the hackneys operate on an agreed fare in advance approach, which is right. I suppose, more light touch regulation.
Right, so it's less regulation, but you agree. But the
in
question
this sector,
you nearly want to tick a box to make sure that you agree to it or something.
The NTA will be an independent regulator, and it can make its own choices. It will have powers to regulate fares. It may well opt for a more light-handed approach, but I can't make that decision. We're just putting in the powers.
But when it is made, we'll be told. It's not that's. That'll cover you, Desi. Sorry, anybody else wish to raise any other question?
Chairman, if we could just get the initial round of questions, the outstanding questions that haven't been answered, if we could get them answered and then...
As you would ask, or to get clarity on those. I want to say that I do think the witnesses are doing their very best to help us. I'm told you're avoiding any question.
Witnesses have an issue with.
Who is that? Go on.
Sorry, so to return to Deputy Troy's questions, you asked who would be the competent authority. So, as I have said, the general scheme will set up the NTA as an independent regulator, and it is in our conversations with the NTA, they've been quite clear that at the moment they do not regulate this sector. They have some, obviously, understanding about sustainable transport because they have responsibilities for investment in cycling infrastructure and that, but they expect, as they do in some other parts of their functions, subcontract to an expert in the field, so that they will find somebody who is, and these people do exist in the market, who have expertise in cycling and in inspecting vehicles and in checking.
We don't know.
At the moment, again, this is the regulator will have powers to make sure, and they will be making sure that vehicle inspection occurs. As I understand it at the moment, the NTA does not have those expertises in-house, but such expertise certainly exists, as far as I understand, in Ireland, but certainly in the EU, in terms of people who can inspect vehicles and who can establish the size of the motor and whether they're motorised or non-motorised, so that I do not envisage any difficulty for the NTA, even though they don't have those skills in-house at present. These issues were discussed with the NTA in terms of before developing the general scheme, which is before us. In terms of the insurance, I know a few deputies asked in relation to had we engaged directly with the insurance industry. We haven't engaged directly with the insurance industry. Our sense in terms, as I pointed out, these vehicles that will be licensed under this general scheme will not be motorised vehicles, and they will not be therefore subject to the normal motor insurance requirements. It is expected in our conversation that the insurance requirements in relation to these may well be public liability insurance requirements. However, I suppose it is a step further down the road. We are giving the powers to the NTA to make sure that insurance is in place. And I'm sure that in the future, when it becomes clear that this sector will be regulated, that it will be inspected carefully, that there will be an entirely different approach as to. At the moment, people are doing, as deputies have indicated, concerns. The sector is unregulated and it's not clear what standards are there, what type of vehicles are there. But once we have this regime in place, it will be quite clear that only vehicles that are roadworthy will be licensed, the drivers will be Garda vetted and will have their, will be persons of good repute. So we will be looking at an entirely different industry. And the other issue, I suppose, while I'm aware that the NTA has in recent days issued reports relating to the costs for entry to the taxi industry, it is also the case, I suppose, that given that these are slower vehicles, and indeed for bicycles it's also recognised, if you're cycling a bicycle, you're not facing the same kind of premiums in terms of cycling a bicycle, and in essence these vehicles that we're talking about are like bicycles. So of course I can't say that yet, but I can only say that we expect that the industry will be much more regulated, that standards will be much higher, that they will be carefully enforced, and that the insurance industry will take all of that into cognizance when they begin to set premiums.
Will the NTA publish the regulations that they intend, because what this bill has given them the power to regulate, will they publish their regulations, their draft regulations, at the same time as the bill is going to be debated through the Dáil? Because if we're going to, I suppose, sign off a carte blanche legislation to give full and ultimate authority to the NTA without knowing even what what regulations, and you yourself, to be fair, you're not even able to say for definite today what exact regulations, only that the NTA will ultimately have the power. So I suppose, will they publish their draft regulations in advance of, or concurrently with the draft bill as it's going through the Oireachtas?
It wouldn't be possible for them to publish, I think, at that point while we're going through the Oireachtas, because I think, as you know, when bills pass through the Oireachtas, there is a space for deputies and senators to give their views, and it is quite often the case that the bill changes shape while it's in the Houses. So it may also change shape in relation to the powers for the making of regulations. I mean, in any case, I can't exactly speak, I cannot myself speak on behalf of the NTA, but I think, given the context that the heads of the bill, as now, may end up with, they may vary after the discussions in the Oireachtas. So I think it would be highly unusual for the NTA. They may, we can engage with the NTA, of course, and we have already to establish, if they wish to be publicising the kind of direction they would take with the regulations. So we can certainly engage with them to see if that is possible.
It would be unreasonable for the committee to ask that they would be required to publish them. It's not what you're really saying. Before they would sign them into their law or their, what you're saying is there needs to be a transparency about what the regulations are going to be, and for people to comment on them before they become their regulations. So that's what you're saying. You publish a draft. Is that what you're saying there?
Once the bill has been enacted and has commenced, if the Oireachtas so wishes, of course, in terms of the discussions at report stage or committee stage,
the point that Deputy Troy is making is that he would like there to be a consultation, a draft. It's no big deal that they publish it. This is what we propose to do, and it may well be that they may have left a huge lacuna in the regulations.
If you leave total and extreme power to the NTA without any recourse, they can go back and say, well, this is what we got. You gave the power to the NTA, and at that such stage,
sure.
But anyway, we'll have the opportunity to tease this as it goes through the Oireachtas.
Just in regards to the rules of the road and safety, are we going to lay down some rules in regards to anyone who's going to carry passengers, that they must do safety courses, they must pass the rules of the road? Is there going to be some sort of a lead on? I think it's important that we have some sort of regulation, how they deal with traffic lights, how they deal with, you know, all these issues. Because it'd be madness just to put a bill through without having some sort of a guide like that, you know.
That's a very good point. So you're saying at the licensing phase that if I apply for my licence that I would have to do...
Well, you see, in the case of the non-motorised, you don't need a licence.
No,
but surely we should have...
They would need a licence. They all need a licence, don't
Yeah.
they?
No, they don't need a driver's licence, but I'm just saying, surely we should have some...
Rickshaw, don't they?
Yeah.
They need a licence if they
They
want
would
to
need a
carry
licence,
passengers.
so they'll have to... I mean,
yeah, okay.
the
Sorry.
requirement should be that do a test of knowledge.
Head 18 is in relation to assessment of licence applicants, and it says that the NTA may by regulations establish requirements and conditions for the assessment of applicants, and these include the Garda vetting, knowledge and ability to meet the needs of people with disabilities, knowledge and ability to meet the pedicab transport needs of consumers, and knowledge of the rules of the road, essentially. So it's covered there.
In that, it's not saying that it's going to be compulsory, that they're going to... That's something we probably have to address as we go along, is it?
At the moment, it is. The approach in the bill has been to be permissive and to say the NTA may, but obviously, again, these will be discussed in the Houses of the Oireachtas, and if people feel that there are things that should be mandatory, then that can be raised at that point.
Yeah, Deputy Munster.
Yeah,
just on that very last point, I don't think it would be unreasonable not to expect that there would have to be a mandatory test of knowledge. Yeah, sorry, Deputy Munster.
Yeah, just in relation to the question, one of the questions I'd asked about the separate consultation process, when it became clear that the actual drivers hadn't engaged with the initial public consultation process. I was just looking to see, you know, did drivers engage, how many drivers engaged, or was it rickshaw business owners that actually engaged? And just on the point of, I'm going back to the fact that the Minister plans to ban the motorised one. There's still the question there, regardless of, you know, he says that the non-motorised and motorised look the same or whatever, but practically every other city in the world has managed to regulate for motorised rickshaws. And I'm just wondering, was it the taxi industry that had a part in this, in the decision, based on the fact that, you know, as I said, every other city seems to have managed for both pedal-powered and motorised?
I mean, it's a policy choice in various cities. Some cities have chosen to only have pedal assist or pedal powered. In fact, I think in New York, it's only pedal powered. You can't even have a pedal assist. So it just depends on how people want to manage their environments in a city space. Just to point out that actually 75% of the people who answered in the NTA survey, around 75% when they were asked what type of rickshaw do you operate, said either pedal powered or pedal assist. So it does seem that a large number of the ones on the streets at the moment are in that vein already. In terms of in terms of the consultation, I know there's in terms of the consultation that the Department of Consult launched in the summer.
Separate one,
It was launched and there were obviously advertisements in the national newspapers. We received 35 unique submissions. 27 of these were from those working in the sector, 25 of whom declared they were or appeared to be drivers, one who appeared to be a fleet owner and one repair specialist. And it seems that there were a further 8 responses from outside of the rickshaw sector, even though we had invited specifically views from the sector. In essence, the majority of views expressed were to see the desire to have the sector regulated, and they raised the kind of issues we've been discussing today, like insurance, driver registration, vehicle registration, benefits for tourism. And I suppose it was felt, a view that emerged from it was that the industry was good for tourism and supports job creation for students. But in essence, we were, I suppose, maybe it was a consolation, and that was the response.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Thanks.
Deputy Rock,
I didn't indicate. I was listening to the proceedings upstairs.
We were talking about you earlier.
As you might have gathered and gleaned. It's always important, I think, to allow for legislative changes to keep pace with changing technology. and with changes in attitudes and behaviour on our streets, as referenced by my constituency colleague. There are advances in technology and change in technology. And
He's
indeed,
counted the wheels on your vehicle.
Yeah. And much like the wheels of politics continue to go round and round, the wheels of transport continue to go round and round. And it's important that our laws reflect that, I suppose. So I very much welcome the work put into this from the consultation to this point that we're at right now, both from the department perspective and from the NTA perspective, and indeed from the Minister's perspective. Minister Ross has done work on this, and I know he's been criticised and pilloried by many for the work. But it has reached this point, and I think it's important to acknowledge that it's reached this point. We had a consultation. There are various vested interests, whether you're a driver of these vehicles, whether you're a taxi person, or whether you're a pedestrian, an individual who maybe feels threatened by these vehicles. So I think it's important that we take account of all these perspectives. And I think the consultation has done that, and the point that we've reached is a good point. My colleague from Fianna Fáil, Deputy Troy, had mentioned a further consultation subsequently, and you agreed with that, I believe, Chair. I think that is important. I think it's important that we set down a framework for that, and that was the only comment I really sought to make. And I just wanted that noted, because I think it is important to review these things and to make sure that if we put this on the books, that it has the desired effect.
We agreed the heads of the bill. The legislation comes into the Oireachtas. The Minister will have a commentary on what we said, the main points that were made, and if anything isn't changed in the bill that we want change, we can change it while the bill is progressing. Is that the way?
I mean, this is an opportunity to hear views from the committee and to help us to shape the legislation, because we obviously will be spending some time drafting it with the Office of the Parliamentary Council.
Sorry, Chair, Vice Chair.
I'm all for regulation and welcome what's going to come through, like, in principle, like, and obviously there will be amendments. I suppose in the interest of clarity and fairness, like, when we're dealing with the rickshaw, if you're dealing with licensed taxis, like, they have representative groups. Is there a group representing the rickshaw users? When the department goes out there, who do they meet? Individuals as a representative group there on behalf of the rickshaw users, like, And secondly, like, it's important, this legislation, like, is enacted countrywide and not just selective areas, like, that it's national. It'll affect Galway and Limerick as well, like, will it?
Yeah, it will be a national piece of legislation. When I was speaking earlier, it was in relation to what operations are out there on the ground at the moment, and at the moment we're aware of rickshaws in Dublin and Cork. They had been in Galway, but they're not there at the moment, and as far as my understanding is, they're not in Limerick. But once we adopt, or once the Houses of the Oireachtas adopt the piece of legislation, then obviously it will be national and will allow for the licensing of rickshaws anywhere in Ireland.
Question and consultation.
And the consultation, then, who do you deal with from their side, like,
The rickshaws, as we have been pointing out, are a sector which operates to a large extent, I suppose, below the radar. They don't have a representative organisation that I am at all aware of. And as I was suggesting, when we sought views specifically from the sector rather than from the wider public, we had, I suppose, quite a limited number of people contacting us.
Some did contact you, is it?
Yeah, so we had 27 of the 35 unique submissions. 27 of these were from those working in the rickshaw sector. 25 declared they were, or they appeared to be drivers from the content of their submissions. One seemed to be a fleet owner, and one seemed to be a repair specialist, and 8 were from outside the sector. So,
is there a mechanism, Chair, we could create a public awareness for these users, like,
This debate certainly will, I would say, hopefully, anyway. And when it comes into, you see, the whole point is that this is it's a second discussion we're having.
I know.
But the legislation will, if anybody out there that is a rickshaw user or an owner or a cyclist or whatever you want to call them, given the different combinations you can have, right into the committee or right into the minister.
I know, but how does it happen and get the word out to them?
Well, we'll make sure the department knows.
and I mean, there has been quite a lot of coverage in relation to rickshaws. Yeah. It has been quite apparent for quite some time that a change in the approach for the regulation of this sector is imminent, both from Deputy Munster's amendments and Deputy Troy's private member's bill, and from our own engagement with the committee. The Minister said he was minded to take a different approach and has published a general scheme. So there has been quite a lot of discussion and clarity that there is going to be a change.
There is a side here, like, and the public media, but go up the street there and Grafton Street and ask them, and half of them would know what you're talking about. What the proposed regulations are, they just look at you in amazement.
I suppose the due process allows them to have the opportunity of listening to our dulcet tones in here, but more importantly, you know, to let the debates and this discussion and the Oireachtas, if we pass the heads, which I presume we will now, if that's agreed, and we move on to the next stage, and the Minister brings in the legislation, then we have the full debates there.
There will be some time to go. I mean, there will still be significant drafting work to be done and publication, so there will be still a time.
We're informing the debate as it goes along. Sorry, is everybody happy with that? Will I adjourn now? I'll adjourn until, we'd like to thank the witnesses for attending here today. Can I ask the members now able to conclude, is the committee now able to conclude its consideration of the general scheme of the legislation and an according report back to the Minister? Is that agreed? It is. The joint committee is now adjourned in a day. Thank you very much.